Guatemala is a nation plagued by hazards that, due to poor planning and lack of funds, turn into disasters. It is still a developing country, and there is still lots to learn and lots of ways to improve, but great strides have been made over the past 20 years. In 1960, a civil war began that was devastating for the country. People were repressed because they began to organize and develop social groups, and the government felt very threatened. 16 years after the Civil War started, an earthquake occurred. This earthquake was absolutely devastating to the country, both financially, but also in the loss of lives and in the people that were injured. The people continued to develop their social organizations after this, and the government continued to feel threatened and continued to repress them for 20 more years after the earthquake occurred. When the Civil War finally was ended in 1996, the government really took strides to improve its abilities to manage disasters and reduce risk. Guatemala faces several different types of hazards. They face the complex humanitarian emergencies like the Civil War, and there's always a risk of that reoccurring. It also faces many natural hazards such as earthquakes, volcanoes, landslides, floods, droughts, and the most prominent one is different types of storms like tropical storms and hurricanes. These tend to be the most financially damaging and damaging as far as loss of life goes. There are also many hazards due to poor sewage and poor infrastructure. For example, sewage lines go directly into rivers or lakes instead of being treated, and many of these sewage pipelines are old and are bursting, causing sinkholes to occur in some parts of the country. Guatemala's plan is really outlined by the Hyogo Framework for Action. This plan has 5 different priorities, the first one being focused on policy, and Guatemala has put many laws, including building codes, into place and has created many organizations focused on risk reduction and disaster management. The second priority is risk assessment. They've included monitoring systems, early warning systems, and improved technology. The third focus is on education. They have created grade school programs focused on the education of their children in order to raise children who are aware of the hazards in the areas in which they live. They've also created several different awareness campaigns to raise awareness throughout the country of different hazards and disasters that can occur in their country. The fourth priority is focused on reducing risk factors. By using better urban planning and using these risk assessments, they're able to create better communities and safer communities. They have moved people who were at risk for landslides and also not allowed communities to be built in areas where landslides are really common. The fifth priority is effective response. The organizations created under the first priority have really come into play here, where they're able to more effectively and efficiently use foreign aid and aid from their budget by coordinating and allowing aid to be dispersed correctly. They also have better funding in their budget for disaster management. Money is the main obstacle that Guatemala faces. They have improved that somewhat by adding budget lines, but it's still hard for them to fully fund their disaster management plans and their risk reduction plans. There's also a long period of time where they would take the money from social programs and put it into disaster management when a disaster would occur. And so this really reduced their ability to develop because the money was all being funded towards disaster recovery instead of going towards social programs. Another huge problem is informal settlements. These are large groups of people living in very poorly constructed houses and areas, and they're very prone to being at risk for landslides, flooding, and earthquakes. Often these are very devastating for these communities. So Guatemala has to figure out a way to regulate them where they're under the building codes and things like that instead of just being able to be formed however and whenever they want to be. Guatemala has made so much progress in their ability to handle disasters and to reduce risk, but even with all this progress, there is still work to be done.